My name is Kimberly Jackson. I'm 32 years old, and for the longest time, I thought being invisible was just part of who I was supposed to be. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and nobody even looks up? That was my entire childhood, my teenage years, and most of my 20s. My family treated me like a maid, and honestly, I didn't even realize how bad it was until a Silicon Valley CEO named Alexander Thompson walked into my life and offered me a $3 million deal. But here's the thing. This isn't just a story about money. This is about what happens when you finally wake up and realize you've been living someone else's life, not your own. If you've ever felt like you were giving everything and getting nothing in return, hit that subscribe button and smash the like button, because what I'm about to tell you might just change the way you see your own life. Have you ever been taken for granted by the people who were supposed to love you the most? I remember standing in my mother Margaret's kitchen on a random Tuesday afternoon, scrubbing dishes that weren't even mine, listening to my older sister Rachel laugh with her friends in the living room. Nobody asked me to join them. Nobody even acknowledged I was there. It was like I was a ghost in my own home, just floating around, cleaning up after everyone, making sure everything ran smoothly while they lived their lives. My brother David would leave his dirty clothes on the bathroom floor, and somehow it became my responsibility to pick them up. My mother would cook dinner, and I'd be the one washing every pot, every pan, every single plate while everyone else watched TV. This wasn't occasional help. This was my entire existence. The worst part wasn't even the physical labor, if I'm being honest. It was the emotional weight of being completely unseen. I'd come home excited about something that happened at my job, and before I could even finish my sentence, Rachel would interrupt with some story about her promotion or her new boyfriend. My mother would nod along, fully engaged, asking questions, showing genuine interest. Then she'd look at me and say something like, "Kimberly, can you grab me some water?" Just like that, my moment was gone. I learned pretty quickly that my stories didn't matter, my feelings didn't matter, and my accomplishments definitely didn't matter. I spent years trying to earn their attention, thinking that if I just did more, gave more, sacrificed more, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe they'd finally appreciate everything I did for them. I'd wake up early to make breakfast before anyone else got up. I'd stay up late organizing family events that nobody even thanked me for. I planned my mother's birthday parties, my sister's baby shower, my brother's graduation celebration. I did everything. And every single time, I'd hear the same thing. "Oh, Kimberly's so helpful. What would we do without her?" But it wasn't said with gratitude. It was said with expectation, like being helpful was just my default setting, my only purpose. Looking back now, I can see exactly when it started. I was about 7 years old when my father left, and suddenly my mother needed help with everything. Rachel was 13 and David was 10, and they both got to grieve and act out and be angry. But me? I was told to be strong, to help mommy, to make things easier for everyone. So I did. I became the little helper, the good girl, the one who never complained, and that role just stuck. It became my identity. 25 years later, I was still playing the same part, still trying to make everyone else's life easier while mine just disappeared. But you won't believe what happened next that completely shattered this pattern and changed everything. The thing about being invisible for so long is that you start to believe that's all you deserve. You convince yourself that this is just how families work, that sacrifice is love, that giving everything away is somehow noble. I used to tell myself stories to make it okay. They're busy, they don't mean to overlook me. Or, I'm just naturally more helpful than other people. But deep down, in that quiet place you don't want to admit exists, I knew the truth. I was being used, and what's worse, I was letting it happen. If you've ever felt like you're drowning while everyone around you is breathing just fine, hit that like button and subscribe, because I want you to know you're not alone. When did you first realize you were giving more than you were receiving? Drop your story in the comments. My wake-up call didn't come all at once. It was more like a slow, painful realization that built up over months. I was working as a software quality analyst at a mid-sized tech company in San Jose. Nothing fancy, but decent enough. I was good at my job, really good actually, but I never pushed for promotions or raises because, honestly, I didn't think I deserved them. That's what happens when you grow up being told your value is in what you do for others, not in who you are. I'd go to work, do my tasks, come home, and immediately slip back into my role as the family helper. My apartment was just a place I slept between shifts of taking care of everyone else. Rachel had 2 kids by this point, and guess who became the free babysitter every weekend? Me. Not because she asked nicely or because I offered. It was just expected. She'd text me on Friday night, dropping the kids off at 9 tomorrow, and that was it. No please, no if you're free, just a statement of fact. And I'd cancel whatever plans I had, which honestly weren't many, and spend my Saturday changing diapers and making chicken nuggets while Rachel went out with her husband. My mother would call me 3 times a day with random requests. Come help me move this furniture. Can you drive me to my doctor's appointment? I need you to organize my closet. David lived across the country, so at least I was spared his demands, but he'd still call asking for money occasionally, which I'd send without question. The emotional toll was crushing me, but I didn't have the language to describe it back then. I just knew I felt tired all the time, this bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. I felt angry but couldn't figure out who I was angry at, them for taking advantage, or myself for allowing it. I felt sad, this constant low-grade sadness that colored everything gray. My friends, the few I had left, would ask me to hang out, and I'd make excuses because I had family obligations. Eventually, they stopped asking. I remember looking at myself in the mirror one morning before work, really looking, and not recognizing the woman staring back at me. She looked defeated. She looked empty. She looked like someone who had forgotten she was even allowed to want things for herself. That's when the resentment started creeping in, slow and poisonous like vines growing through cracks in concrete. I'd be washing dishes in my mother's kitchen, again, and I'd catch myself gripping the sponge so hard my knuckles turned white. I'd be watching Rachel's kids throw toys everywhere while she posted Instagram photos from some restaurant, and I'd feel this heat rising in my chest that scared me. I'd never been an angry person. I'd always been the peacekeeper, the agreeable one, the one who smoothed things over. But suddenly I was having thoughts I'd never had before. Dark thoughts about just walking away and never coming back. Thoughts about telling them exactly what I thought of their selfishness. Thoughts about finally putting myself first. But those thoughts also terrified me because they meant admitting that the last 25 years of my life had been built on a lie. The lie that my sacrifice meant something, that it would eventually be recognized, that love would somehow balance out. And what happens when you realize nobody's coming to save you except yourself? The pattern of sacrifice became so deeply woven into my life that I couldn't see where I ended and where my family's needs began. Every decision I made, every choice, every single moment of my day revolved around what someone else needed from me. I stopped asking myself what I wanted, because honestly, I'd forgotten that was even a valid question. If you're watching this and you recognize this feeling, that suffocating sensation of living for everyone except yourself, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because we need to talk about this. When was the last time you did something purely for yourself without feeling guilty about it? Share your answer below. And let's build a community where we actually matter. My sacrifice wasn't just about the physical tasks, though those were exhausting enough. It was the emotional labor that really broke me down piece by piece. I'd spend hours listening to Rachel complain about her marriage, offering advice she never took, being her free therapist while she vented about her husband Marcus. She'd call me at 11 at night, knowing I had work in the morning, and talk for 2 hours straight without once asking how I was doing. My mother would guilt-trip me if I couldn't make it to Sunday dinner, saying things like, "I guess I'm just not important enough for my own daughter," even though I'd been there every single Sunday for the past year. David would disappear for months, then suddenly call asking for money to cover his rent because he'd gotten fired again, and I'd send it without hesitation because family helps family. I remember one specific incident that should have been my breaking point, but somehow wasn't. It was my 30th birthday, and I'd planned something small for myself, dinner with a couple of friends at this Italian restaurant I'd been wanting to try. Nothing crazy, just a few hours to celebrate making it through another year. The morning of my birthday, Rachel called in a panic because her babysitter canceled and she had a really important meeting she couldn't miss. She begged me to watch her kids, promised it would only be a few hours. I canceled my dinner reservation. I called my friends and apologized. I spent my 30th birthday changing diapers and breaking up fights between 2 screaming toddlers. Rachel didn't get home until after midnight. She never apologized. She never even acknowledged that she'd ruined my birthday. When I mentioned it weeks later, she looked at me confused and said, "But you love spending time with your nephews." The financial sacrifice was crushing me too, though I tried not to think about it. I was making decent money at my job, probably around $70,000 a year, which in San Jose isn't much, but should have been enough to save something, to build a life. Instead, I was constantly broke. I'd lend money to David that I'd never see again, probably close to $15,000 over the years. I'd buy groceries for my mother's house because she'd complain about her fixed income, even though she somehow had money for her weekly manicures and shopping trips. I'd pay for Rachel's kids' birthday presents, school supplies, clothes, because she'd say things like, "It's so expensive raising kids. I don't know how we manage," while posting photos of her new designer purse. I was subsidizing everyone else's life while mine stayed stagnant. What haunts me most about this period is how completely I'd lost myself. I looked at old photos from college, and I barely recognized that girl. She looked happy, confident, full of dreams and possibilities. She wanted to travel, maybe start her own business someday, write a book, learn to paint. But 30-year-old me? I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something creative or adventurous. My entire identity had been swallowed up by this role of caretaker, helper, supporter, invisible foundation that everyone else built their lives on. I was the person who made sure everyone else got to shine while I stayed in the shadows, holding up the spotlight. And the worst part was that I'd convinced myself this was love, that this was what good daughters and sisters did. But was it love? Or was it just a comfortable arrangement where they got everything they needed, and I got nothing except the privilege of being needed? That question kept me up at night, and the answer terrified me. Here's something I didn't understand for the longest time. My family wasn't just taking advantage of my kindness. They were actively manipulating me to keep me in this role. It was subtle, so subtle that I didn't even notice it happening until years later when I looked back with clear eyes. Every time I tried to set a boundary, every time I said I couldn't do something, there was immediate pushback designed to make me feel guilty, selfish, or cruel. They'd weaponized my love for them against me, turning my desire to be a good family member into chains that kept me locked in place. And the scariest part? They probably didn't even realize they were doing it. Manipulation doesn't always come from malicious intent. Sometimes it comes from people who've just gotten used to taking and don't want that to change. My mother, Margaret, was the master of emotional manipulation, though she'd deny it to her grave. She had this way of making everything about her feelings, her needs, her comfort. If I couldn't help her with something, she'd sigh heavily and say, "It's fine, I'll just do it myself," in this martyred tone that dripped with disappointment. Or she'd bring up how hard she worked raising 3 kids alone after Dad left, how she sacrificed everything for us, and now that she needed help, we should be there for her. The implication was always clear. I owed her, not just help, but my entire life. If I mentioned being tired or stressed, she'd one-up me with her own problems. "You think you're tired? Try being 63 with arthritis." It made me feel like my struggles weren't valid, like I had no right to complain when she'd had it so much harder. Rachel's manipulation was more direct but equally effective. She'd use her kids as leverage, knowing I loved my nephews Tyler and Mason. The boys really missed their Aunt Kimberly. She'd text when she wanted free babysitting. Tyler asked why you don't come around anymore, even though I'd been there 3 days ago. She'd paint me as the bad guy to her kids if I said no, making them think I didn't want to spend time with them. And it worked. I couldn't stand the thought of disappointing those little boys who hadn't asked to be part of their mother's manipulation game. Rachel also loved the comparison game. She'd talk about her other friends' siblings who did this or that for them, subtly implying I wasn't measuring up. Marcus's sister watches their kids every weekend for free. His sister bought them a new car seat. His sister helped them repaint their house. The message was clear. I should be doing more. David's manipulation was the most obvious, but somehow still effective. He'd disappear for months, and then suddenly show up when he needed something, usually money. But he'd frame it as if he was doing me a favor by including me in his life. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I really value our relationship and I wanted to reach out. Then, 20 minutes into the conversation, the real reason would emerge. He needed $2,000 for rent, or his car broke down and he needed $1,500 for repairs, or he lost his job and needed money to hold him over until his unemployment kicked in. If I hesitated, he'd get angry. I can't believe my own sister won't help me. Blood is supposed to mean something, Kim. He'd make me feel like I was abandoning him, like I was a bad person for not immediately opening my wallet. And then he'd promise to pay me back, swear this was the last time, say he was getting his life together. I believed him every single time. The manipulation extended beyond just requests for help. It was about keeping me small, keeping me in my place. Anytime something good happened to me at work or in my personal life, there was this subtle undermining that happened. I got a small raise once, maybe 5%, and I mentioned it excitedly at Sunday dinner. My mother's response? "That's nice, dear, but don't let it go to your head. Pride comes before a fall." Rachel would make backhanded comments about my appearance or my choices. "Oh, you're wearing that? I mean, if you like it, that's all that matters." David would mock my job. 70,000 a year in Silicon Valley? That's basically poverty wages. Maybe you should have studied something more useful. These comments seemed small in isolation, but together they formed this constant message. Don't get too confident. Don't think you're special. Don't rise above your station. Stay grateful for what you have and keep serving us. What I didn't realize then was that people who truly love you don't need to make you feel small to feel big themselves. But I was about to learn that lesson in the most unexpected way possible. The awakening didn't happen all at once. It was more like slowly coming out of a fog that had surrounded me for decades. I started noticing little things that never bothered me before, like how Rachel would walk past me in my mother's kitchen without saying hello, or how David never asked about my life during his phone calls. These small observations started piling up like drops of water filling a bucket, and I knew that eventually something was going to overflow. If you've ever had that moment where you suddenly see your life from the outside and realize you've been living on autopilot, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what comes next might be the wake-up call you need too. What was the moment that made you realize you deserved better? I want to hear your story in the comments below. The first real crack in my denial came during a random Tuesday afternoon in March. I was sitting at my desk at work, eating lunch alone like I always did, scrolling through social media. Rachel had posted photos from a spa weekend she'd taken with her friends. Massages, facials, champagne, the whole luxury treatment. The caption said something like, "Finally taking time for self-care. Every mom needs a break." I stared at that post for a long time, feeling something dark and bitter rising in my chest. This was the same woman who'd told me 2 weeks earlier that she couldn't afford to hire a babysitter. The same woman who'd guilted me into watching her kids every weekend for free because money was so tight. But she had money for a spa weekend that probably cost at least $1,000. The hypocrisy hit me like a truck. I started paying attention after that, really paying attention, and what I saw made me sick. My mother would complain about her fixed income, but she'd come home with shopping bags from department stores at least twice a week. David would cry poverty and ask me for money, then post Instagram stories from bars and restaurants, clearly spending money he claimed he didn't have. They weren't poor. They just didn't want to spend their own money when they could spend mine. They weren't struggling. They just knew I'd always say yes, always help, always sacrifice. I'd been so focused on being a good daughter and sister that I'd never stopped to ask if they were being good to me. The answer was crushing. They weren't. They'd never been good to me. They'd just been good at using me. This realization sent me into a spiral of questioning everything I'd believed about my family and my role in it. I started thinking about all the times I'd canceled my own plans to accommodate theirs, all the money I'd given that was never repaid, all the emotional support I'd provided that was never reciprocated. I thought about my 30th birthday, ruined without apology. I thought about the time I was sick with the flu and called my mother asking if she could bring me some soup, and she said she was too busy but reminded me that I'd promised to help her organize her garage that weekend. I thought about how Rachel had never once watched my apartment when I went on vacation, but I'd house sat for her at least a dozen times. The scorecard was so one-sided it was laughable, except I didn't feel like laughing. I felt like crying for the woman I'd been, who'd given so much and asked for so little. But here's the thing about awakening. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I couldn't go back to being blissfully unaware. I couldn't pretend anymore that this was normal, that this was what family meant, that this was love. Every interaction became painful because I could see the manipulation so clearly now. When my mother called asking for help, I could hear the entitled expectation in her voice. When Rachel texted me about babysitting, I could feel the lack of consideration for my time. When David asked for money, I could sense the assumption that I'd say yes without question. My eyes were open, and what I saw was ugly. The question that haunted me was, what do you do when you realize the people you love don't really love you back? How do you walk away from family? And more importantly, did I have the strength to do what needed to be done? I was about to find out, because everything was about to change in a way I never could have predicted. There's always one moment, one specific incident that becomes the point of no return. For me, it happened on a Saturday morning in late April, and it involved something so small, so seemingly insignificant, that I'm almost embarrassed to admit it was my breaking point. But sometimes the smallest things carry the weight of years of accumulated pain, and when they land, they shatter everything. This wasn't about one bad day. This was about finally having enough, about reaching a limit I didn't even know existed inside me. It was the moment when something inside me broke, And I realized I couldn't keep living this way anymore. Not for another day, not for another hour. I'd been up since 5 in the morning cleaning my mother's house because she was hosting some church group meeting that afternoon and claimed she couldn't possibly get it all done herself. I scrubbed bathrooms, vacuumed carpets, dusted furniture, organized her cluttered kitchen, all before heading to Rachel's house to watch Tyler and Mason because she and Marcus were going to some concert. By the time I got to Rachel's place around 11, I was already exhausted. She answered the door in a beautiful new dress, hair and makeup done perfectly, clearly excited for her day. She barely looked at me as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Then she stopped, turned around, and said something that would echo in my head for weeks. "Oh, and Kim, try not to let the boys eat too much junk food like you did last time. I'm trying to teach them healthy habits, and you kind of undermine that." I stood there in her entryway, frozen, while she and Marcus walked out to their car, laughing about something. Try not to let the boys eat too much junk food, like I was the problem. Like I was somehow failing at the free childcare I was providing while she went off to enjoy her life. Something inside me just snapped. Not in an explosive way, but in a quiet, final way. It was like a rope I'd been holding onto for 32 years just frayed apart, and suddenly I was free-falling. I looked around her beautiful house, the house she claimed she couldn't afford to maintain, the house that was twice the size of my tiny apartment, and I felt this wave of rage so intense it scared me. Who were these people? What had I become to them? Was I really just a free service they could criticize and take for granted? I spent that afternoon watching Tyler and Mason, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was running through decades of memories with new eyes, seeing patterns I'd been blind to before. Every time I'd helped, it had been met with either silence or criticism, never genuine gratitude, never reciprocal kindness. My mother had once told me I'd loaded the dishwasher wrong after I'd spent 6 hours cleaning her entire house. David had complained that the money I'd sent him wasn't enough when I'd literally given him my last $400 before payday. Rachel had criticized the birthday present I'd bought Tyler, saying it wasn't educational enough, after I'd spent over $100 on it. Nothing I did was ever good enough, but somehow they always needed me to do more. The dynamic was insane, and I'd been too deep in it to see how toxic it really was. When Rachel got home that night around 11, 3 hours later than she'd promised, she didn't apologize. She just paid the babysitter she'd hired for the evening, then looked at me confused when I stared at her. "What?" she asked. "You weren't available tonight." Except I had been available. She just hadn't asked me because she'd already used up her free childcare quota for the day. I'd spent 12 hours serving my family, and she'd paid a stranger $75 for 3 hours of the same service rather than offer me anything. I drove home that night with tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't keep living like this. The old Kimberly, the one who accepted crumbs and called it love, was dying. And honestly, it was about time. But what I didn't know was that the universe was about to present me with an opportunity that would change everything and test exactly how much courage I really had. Life has this strange way of presenting opportunities exactly when you need them most, like the universe was just waiting for you to be ready to receive them. 2 weeks after my breaking point at Rachel's house, I was sitting in my cubicle at work, running quality tests on some software update, when my manager Jennifer walked over with someone I'd never seen before. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, wearing an expensive suit but with this casual confidence that immediately made you pay attention. "Kimberly, this is Alexander Thompson, CEO of Next Gen Solutions. He's visiting our department today and wanted to meet some of our top performers." I nearly dropped my coffee. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like giving up right before everything changed, hit that subscribe button and drop a like right now, because what happened next literally altered the entire course of my life. Have you ever had a moment where opportunity knocked when you least expected it? Tell me about it in the comments. Alexander Thompson shook my hand with this firm grip and genuine smile that immediately set him apart from every other executive I'd ever met. Most CEOs did these department tours like they were visiting a zoo, barely making eye contact, clearly counting the minutes until they could leave. But Alexander actually pulled up a chair and asked me about my work. Real questions, not generic ones. He wanted to know about the specific challenges I faced in quality analysis, what tools I wished existed, what frustrated me about current systems. I found myself talking more openly than I had in months, maybe years. There was something about his attention, the way he actually listened, took notes, asked follow-up questions. that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in my personal life for as long as I could remember. We talked for maybe 20 minutes before he had to move on to meet other team members, but before he left, he handed me his business card. I'm working on a new project, something that could revolutionize quality assurance and software development. Based on what you've told me today, I think you might be exactly the kind of innovative thinker I need on my team. Would you be interested in having a more detailed conversation? I stared at that card like it was made of gold. Next Gen Solutions was one of the biggest tech companies in Silicon Valley, the kind of place people dreamed about working, and the CEO had just personally invited me to discuss joining his team. I managed to say yes, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound as desperate and excited as I felt. He smiled again. Great. My assistant will reach out to schedule something. I have a good feeling about this, Kimberly. The next week felt like it lasted a year. Alexander's assistant, Elena, called me 2 days later and scheduled a meeting at their headquarters in Mountain View for the following Wednesday. I took the day off work, telling Jennifer I had a doctor's appointment, feeling guilty about the lie, but knowing this was something I had to do. The Next Gen building was stunning, all glass and modern architecture, with this incredible view of the bay. Elena greeted me in the lobby and led me up to Alexander's office on the top floor. The meeting was supposed to be an hour, but we talked for almost 3. He explained his vision for this new quality assurance platform that would use AI and machine learning to predict software failures before they happened. He'd been developing the concept for 2 years, and now he was ready to build the team to make it reality. Then came the moment that stopped my heart. Alexander leaned back in his chair, looked at me directly, and said, "Kimberly, I want you to lead this project as Director of Quality Innovation. The base salary would be $200,000 annually, plus equity in the company. But more importantly, I'm offering you a $3 million signing bonus and project development fund because I believe in your vision and I want you fully invested in making this work." I couldn't breathe. $3 million, a director position, leading a revolutionary project. This was the kind of opportunity that doesn't just change careers, it changes entire lives. I asked if I could have a few days to think about it, and Alexander nodded. "Of course, this is a big decision. Take the time you need. But Kimberly, don't let fear or other people's opinions stop you from betting on yourself. You're more capable than you realize." I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing with possibilities. This was it. This was my chance to finally build the life I'd always dreamed of. But I made one critical mistake. I told my family about it. And that's when everything fell apart in ways I never saw coming. You'd think that when something incredible happens to someone you love, you'd be happy for them. You'd celebrate their success, support their dreams, encourage them to take the leap. That's what normal, healthy families do. But I didn't have a normal, healthy family, and I was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. I made the mistake of sharing my news at Sunday dinner the week after my meeting with Alexander. I walked into my mother's house that afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in years, actually excited about something, actually believing that maybe my life was about to change. I thought they'd be proud of me. I thought they'd be excited. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong. I waited until we were all sitting around the dining table. My mother, Margaret, my sister, Rachel, with Marcus, and even David, who was in town visiting. I took a deep breath and told them about the offer. $3 million, director position, leading a groundbreaking project at one of Silicon Valley's most respected companies. I watched their faces as I spoke, expecting smiles, congratulations, maybe even a hug. Instead, I got silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence that stretched on for what felt like forever. Finally, my mother put down her fork and said, "That sounds too good to be true, Kimberly. Are you sure this isn't some kind of scam?" The excitement drained out of me like someone had pulled a plug. A scam. That was her first response. Not congratulations, not pride, suspicion. Rachel jumped in next, and her words cut even deeper. "I don't know, Kim. Leaving a stable job for some startup thing? That seems really risky. What if it doesn't work out? You're 32, not exactly prime age to be taking wild career gambles." David laughed. Actually laughed and said, $3 million? Come on, Kim. Why would a CEO offer you that kind of money? No offense, but you're a quality analyst. You're not exactly executive material. Each word was like a knife. They weren't just skeptical. They were actively trying to tear down the best thing that had ever happened to me. My mother nodded along with David's assessment. "He's right, honey. This just doesn't make sense. You should be careful. Men like that don't just hand out millions to regular people. What does he really want from you?" The implication in her tone made me feel sick. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain Alexander's vision, the project details, why he thought I was right for the role. But they talked over me, interrupted me, dismissed everything I said. Rachel brought up every mistake I'd ever made, every time I'd failed at something, every reason I should play it safe. Remember when you tried to start that blog and gave up after 2 months? Remember when you said you were going to learn Spanish and quit after 1 class? You're not exactly known for following through on big goals, Kim, my mother added. And what about us? You're just going to abandon your family because some stranger offers you money? That's very selfish, Kimberly. Very selfish indeed. Who's going to help me with everything I need? Who's going to watch Rachel's children? And there it was. The real reason for their opposition. Not concern for my well-being. Not worry about my career. They were afraid of losing their free help. The dinner ended badly. I left early, making some excuse about not feeling well, and sat in my car in the driveway crying so hard I could barely see. My own family had just told me I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't capable enough to deserve this opportunity. They'd planted seeds of doubt that immediately started growing in my mind. What if they were right? What if this was too good to be true? What if I failed? What if Alexander Thompson was wrong about me? I drove home that night feeling more confused and hurt than I had after Rachel's comment about the junk food. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, and they'd turned it into another reason to feel small and inadequate. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, something else started growing alongside the doubt. Anger. Real, justified anger. They didn't want me to succeed because my success meant their convenience ended. They didn't want me to be happy because my happiness meant I'd stop sacrificing myself for them. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder, what would happen if I chose myself over them? What would happen if I said yes to Alexander's offer and no to their expectations? The answer to that question would test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what I really deserved. Learning to say no might be the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that. For 32 years, my default answer to everything was yes. Yes, I'll help. Yes, I'll be there. Yes, I'll sacrifice my plans for yours. Yes, I'll give you money. Yes, I'll watch your kids. Yes, 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 until the word lost all meaning and became just another way of erasing myself. But after that disastrous dinner with my family, I realized that if I was going to accept Alexander Thompson's offer, I had to learn a completely new language, the language of boundaries. If you've ever struggled with saying no to people you love, even when saying yes hurts you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what I'm about to share might be exactly what you need to hear. What's the hardest no you've ever had to say? Drop it in the comments and let's support each other through this. The first test came 3 days after that Sunday dinner. My mother called me at work, which she rarely did, so I knew something was up. I stepped outside to take the call, and she launched right into it without even saying hello. Kimberly, I need you to take me to the doctor next Thursday afternoon. It's just a routine checkup, but I don't like driving in traffic, and you know how I get anxious. Old Kimberly would have immediately checked her calendar and rearranged everything to make it work. New Kimberly, the one who was trying desperately to find her backbone, took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I can't. I have an important meeting at work that day." The silence on the other end was so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. Then came her voice, dripping with disappointment and passive aggression. "I see. Well, I guess I'll just have to figure it out myself. Don't worry about your elderly mother. I'm sure I'll manage somehow." My hands were shaking when I hung up. I felt physically sick, like I'd just committed some terrible crime. The guilt was overwhelming. It wrapped around my throat and made it hard to breathe. I kept picking up my phone to call her back and say I'd changed my mind, that I'd take her to the doctor, that I was sorry for being selfish. But I forced myself to put the phone down and sit with the discomfort. This is what setting boundaries feels like, I told myself. This horrible, nauseating feeling is what healthy people apparently deal with all the time. It didn't feel healthy. It felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. But I didn't call her back. I didn't change my mind. For the first time in my life, I let my no stand without apologizing or explaining or justifying myself to death. Rachel was next. She texted me on Friday asking if I could watch Tyler and Mason all day Saturday because she and Marcus wanted to go wine tasting in Napa. "Just this once," she wrote, even though it was never just once. I stared at that text for a full 20 minutes, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to say yes, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, but I thought about Alexander's offer, about the life I could build if I stopped giving all my time and energy to people who never gave anything back. I typed out my response, deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again. Finally, I settled on something simple. Sorry, I have plans this weekend. Hope you guys have fun. I hit send before I could change my mind, then immediately wanted to throw up. She didn't respond for 6 hours, and when she finally did, it was just one word: fine. That one word carried more judgment and anger than an entire paragraph could have. David called the following Tuesday asking for $1,200 because his car needed repairs and he was broke until his next paycheck. This was the moment I'd been dreading most because saying no to David always felt like abandoning him, and he knew exactly which buttons to push. I listened to his whole story: the car trouble, the mechanic's quote, how stressed he was, how he had no one else to turn to. Then I said the words that felt like poison coming out of my mouth. David, I can't lend you money anymore. I'm making some big changes in my life and I need to focus on my own financial stability. He exploded, called me selfish, heartless, said I'd changed and not in a good way. He brought up every time he'd ever been there for me, which honestly wasn't many times at all, and made me feel like the worst sister in the world. I cried after that call, sobbed actually, because saying no felt like cutting off pieces of myself. But I also knew that if I kept saying yes, there'd be nothing left of me to save. The old Kimberly was dying, and the death was excruciatingly painful. But maybe, just maybe, someone stronger was being born in her place. Someone who understood that you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Someone who was ready to finally choose herself. And that someone was about to make the biggest decision of her life. 2 weeks after my family's devastating reaction to my opportunity, I sat in my tiny apartment on a Thursday night with Alexander Thompson's contract spread out on my coffee table. The signing bonus clause literally said $3 million. The salary section showed $200,000 annually plus equity. The job description outlined a role that would challenge me, stretch me, force me to become someone I'd never been before. I read through every page 3 times, and each time I finished, I'd think about my mother's voice saying I wasn't executive material, Rachel's skepticism about my ability to follow through, David's mockery about why anyone would value me that much. Their voices were so loud in my head, drowning out everything else. But then I thought about something Alexander had said during our meeting. The people who truly love you will celebrate your success, not fear it. And the people who fear it were never really on your side to begin with. I called Alexander the next morning and asked if we could meet one more time before I made my final decision. He agreed immediately and invited me to lunch at this beautiful restaurant overlooking the bay. We sat outside in the sunshine, and I was completely honest with him about my fears. I told him about my family's reaction, about my own doubts, about whether I was really capable of leading a project of this magnitude. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. Kimberly, I've been in this business for 25 years. I've met thousands of people, worked with hundreds of teams. I know talent when I see it, but more importantly, I know hunger. Not hunger for money or status, but hunger to prove something to yourself. You have that. You've been overlooked and underestimated your whole life, and that's made you sharp in ways people who've had everything handed to them can never be. He continued, and his words hit me like a revelation. Your family's negative reaction isn't about you. It's about them losing their safety net, their free labor, their emotional support system that never had to give anything in return. They're scared of you changing because your change threatens their comfortable arrangement. But here's what you need to understand. You don't owe them your small life, so they can feel big. You don't owe them your dreams as payment for their love. Real love doesn't ask for that sacrifice. Real love wants you to soar. I felt tears running down my face, right there in that fancy restaurant, because nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. Nobody had ever given me permission to want more, to be more, to choose myself without drowning in guilt. That weekend, I made my decision. I sat down at my laptop and wrote an email accepting Alexander's offer. My hands were shaking so badly I had to retype several sentences. But I did it. I accepted the $3 million signing bonus. I accepted the director position. I accepted the challenge of leading a revolutionary project. And most importantly, I accepted the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe I was worth all of it. After I hit send, I sat there for a long time, just breathing, just existing in this moment where everything changed. I thought about the girl I'd been, invisible, self-erasing, endlessly giving to people who never gave back. I thought about the woman I was becoming, someone who bet on herself, who said yes to her own dreams, who refused to stay small for other people's comfort. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but it had begun. I didn't tell my family right away. I needed time to build up my strength, to get settled into the new role, to prove to myself that I could actually do this before facing their inevitable criticism and resentment. I started at NextGen Solutions 2 weeks later, and walking into that building on my first day as Director of Quality Innovation felt like stepping into someone else's life. The imposter syndrome was crushing. Every meeting, every decision, every interaction made me question whether I deserved to be there. But I showed up anyway. I worked harder than I'd ever worked before. I learned, I grew, I made mistakes and fixed them. I built a team. I led that revolutionary project with everything I had. And slowly, gradually, the imposter syndrome faded. Not completely, but enough that I could look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked strong. She looked capable. She looked like someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. And the best part? The $3 million sitting in my bank account wasn't even the most valuable thing I'd gained. The most valuable thing was the knowledge that I could choose myself and survive, that I could disappoint people and still be okay, that I could say no and the world wouldn't end. That realization was worth more than any amount of money. But I won't lie, the money definitely helped, especially when what happened next forced me to make choices I never thought I'd have to make. The first 6 months at NextGen Solutions were the most intense, challenging, and rewarding period of my entire professional life. I went from being invisible in a cubicle to leading a team of 12 brilliant engineers, developers, and analysts who all looked to me for direction and vision. The imposter syndrome hit me hard those first few weeks. I'd walk into meetings with people who had degrees from MIT and Stanford, people who'd worked at Google and Apple, and I'd think, what am I doing here? I'm just a quality analyst from a mid-sized company. But Alexander Thompson had seen something in me that I was only beginning to see in myself, and slowly, painfully, I started to believe I deserved to be there. If you're watching this and you've ever doubted yourself while chasing a dream that scared you, hit that subscribe button and drop a like right now, because I need you to know that the doubt doesn't disqualify you. Sometimes it's proof you're doing something worth doing. What's a professional risk you took that changed your life? Share it in the comments and let's celebrate those brave moments together. The project we were building, an AI-powered quality assurance platform that could predict software failures before they happened, was revolutionary, but it was also incredibly complex. I spent my first month just trying to understand all the technical components, staying late every night reading research papers, taking online courses, asking my team 1,000 questions. I was terrified they'd realize I didn't know everything, that they'd lose respect for me, that they'd go to Alexander and tell him he'd made a mistake. But something unexpected happened instead. My team appreciated my honesty about what I didn't know. They respected that I wasn't pretending to be an expert in areas where I wasn't. And my strength, my ability to see patterns, to identify weak points, to anticipate problems before they occurred, that came from years of quality analysis work, and it turned out to be exactly what this project needed. I wasn't an imposter. I was just different from what I'd expected a director to be. My first major presentation came 3 months in, and I had to pitch our progress to the board of directors, 15 people who collectively controlled billions of dollars and could shut down our project with one vote. I barely slept for a week before that presentation, rehearsing every word, anticipating every question, preparing backup slides for backup slides. The morning of the presentation, I stood in the bathroom of the NextGen building, staring at myself in the mirror, and I thought about my mother telling me not to let success go to my head. I thought about Rachel saying I wasn't known for following through on big goals. I thought about David laughing at the idea that anyone would value me enough to pay me millions. And then I thought, screw them. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Their voices didn't get to define me anymore. Their doubt didn't get to limit what I could achieve. I walked into that boardroom and delivered the best presentation of my life. The board approved increased funding for our project. Alexander pulled me aside afterward and said, "That was exceptional, Kimberly. You're exceeding every expectation I had, and my expectations were already high." That moment, standing in that hallway, hearing those words from someone I deeply respected, felt better than any praise I'd ever received from my family. Because it was earned, because it was based on actual accomplishment, not on how much I'd sacrificed or served or erased myself. For the first time in my life, I was being valued for what I created, not for what I gave up. The difference was staggering. I started standing differently, speaking more confidently, taking up space without apologizing. My team noticed. They started coming to me not just with problems, but with ideas, treating me like the leader I was becoming rather than the imposter I'd felt like. 6 months into the role, we had our first major breakthrough, a successful beta test of our platform that accurately predicted system failures with 87% accuracy, far exceeding industry standards. The celebration in our office that day was incredible. Champagne, music, everyone hugging and laughing and feeling like we'd just changed the world. And maybe we had, in a small way. I went home that night to my apartment, which was still small and modest because I hadn't touched most of the $3 million yet, and I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, just existing in this feeling of accomplishment. I'd done it. I'd taken the risk, bet on myself, and won. The professional success was sweet, but the personal transformation was sweeter. I wasn't the invisible helper anymore. I wasn't the woman who existed only to serve others. I was Kimberly Jackson, Director of Quality Innovation, leading a team that was doing something revolutionary. And the best part? I'd done it without my family's approval or support. I'd done it despite their doubt. That realization was both liberating and heartbreaking, because it meant accepting that the people who were supposed to champion me had actually been holding me back all along. But acceptance was the first step towards something I'd never allowed myself before. Actual, genuine freedom. Success changes you in ways you don't expect, and not all of them are comfortable. The $3 million sitting in my bank account gave me a security I'd never known. I could pay off my student loans. I could afford a down payment on a real house. I could travel. I could invest in my future. But more than the money, the success gave me something I'd been missing my entire life. Proof that I mattered. Proof that my skills had value. Proof that I could build something meaningful when I stopped pouring all my energy into people who never appreciated it. That proof changed everything about how I saw myself and how I moved through the world. I started noticing opportunities I'd been blind to before. I started speaking up in meetings instead of staying quiet. I started believing that my ideas deserved to be heard, that my time deserved to be respected, that I deserved to be treated well. But success also created distance between me and my family, a growing chasm that became harder to ignore with each passing month. I'd stopped going to Sunday dinners after I started at NextGen, using work as an excuse at first, but really just needing space from their toxicity while I figured out who I was becoming. My mother called less frequently, and when she did call, there was this coldness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Rachel stopped asking me to babysit, not because she'd found other help, but because our relationship had become strained to the breaking point. David hadn't called at all since I'd refused to lend him money. The silence was both painful and peaceful. Painful because I was mourning the family I'd wanted them to be, the unconditional love and support I'd always craved but never received. Peaceful because without their constant demands and criticisms, I could finally breathe. The financial freedom changed my daily life in ways both big and small. I moved out of my tiny apartment and into a beautiful 2-bedroom condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the mountains. I bought furniture that I actually liked instead of whatever was cheapest. I hired a cleaning service because I was tired of spending my weekends scrubbing bathrooms. I started saying yes to social invitations instead of canceling for family obligations. I traveled to Paris for a long weekend, just because I'd always wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. These might sound like small luxuries, but for someone who'd spent 32 years putting everyone else first, they felt revolutionary. Each choice I made for myself, each moment I prioritized my own happiness, was an act of rebellion against the role I'd been forced into for so long. But the emotional impact was even more profound than the financial one. I started therapy, something I'd always dismissed as too expensive or self-indulgent. And for the first time, I talked openly about my family dynamics with someone trained to understand them. My therapist, Dr. Patricia Reynolds, helped me see patterns I'd been too close to recognize. She taught me words like enmeshment and emotional manipulation and codependency. She helped me understand that what I'd called love was actually a transaction. I gave everything, they took everything, and nobody questioned whether that was fair or healthy. She validated feelings I'd been ashamed of, the anger, the resentment, the grief for the childhood and young adulthood I'd lost to other people's needs. And she helped me see that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. It was the only way I could build a life worth living. 9 months into my new role, I looked at my life and barely recognized it. I had a career that challenged and fulfilled me. I had colleagues who respected my expertise. I had financial security that meant I'd never have to panic about unexpected expenses again. I had a home I loved, hobbies I was exploring, friendships I was rebuilding. But I also had a family that barely spoke to me, relationships that had crumbled under the weight of boundaries I'd finally learned to set. And here's the truth that nobody tells you about choosing yourself. It comes with loss, real, painful loss. The fantasy of who your family could be dies when you stop enabling their dysfunction. The hope that they'll change, that they'll finally see your worth, that they'll apologize and make things right. That hope has to die too. And grieving those losses while celebrating your victories creates this complicated emotional landscape where joy and sadness coexist constantly. Some days I felt unstoppable, like I could conquer anything. Other days I felt like an orphan, untethered and alone. Both feelings were valid. Both feelings were true. And learning to hold both at the same time was part of becoming the woman I needed to be. Someone who could face hard truths without falling apart. Someone who could choose the difficult right thing over the easy wrong thing. Someone who understood that love without respect isn't really love at all. But my family wasn't done with me yet, and what happened when they finally learned about my success would test every boundary I'd built and force me to make choices I never thought I'd have to make. I managed to keep my new life separate from my family for almost a year, which sounds impossible, but was actually easier than you'd think. I stopped going to family events, kept my social media private, and gave vague answers the few times my mother called. But secrets like mine, $3 million, a director position, a completely transformed life, they don't stay hidden forever. The truth came out on a random Tuesday in October, and it happened in the most mundane way possible. Rachel ran into Jennifer, my old manager from my previous job, at a coffee shop. Jennifer, not knowing about my family situation, enthusiastically told Rachel all about my incredible success at Next Gen Solutions. By the time I got home from work that evening, I had 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. The reckoning I'd been avoiding was finally here. If you've ever had to face people who doubted you after you proved them wrong, smash that subscribe button and hit like, because what happened next will probably sound very familiar. How did your family react when you finally succeeded despite their doubts? Share your experience in the comments. I know I'm not alone in this. My mother showed up at my new condo unannounced that same evening. I don't know how she got my address, probably demanded it from Rachel, who might have found it through some internet search. But there she was, standing at my door with this expression that mixed shock, anger, and something else I couldn't quite identify. She walked in without being invited, looked around at my beautiful home with the designer furniture and the stunning view, and the first words out of her mouth were, "So it's true. You've been living this fancy life while your family struggles." Not congratulations, not, "I'm proud of you." Just immediate accusation, immediate positioning of herself as the victim in my success story. I stood there in my entryway, wearing my work clothes that probably cost more than her entire outfit, and I felt that old familiar guilt trying to claw its way back into my chest. But something was different this time. I'd spent a year building a life where I mattered, and I wasn't going to let her tear it down in one evening. Rachel called an hour after my mother left, and the conversation was even worse. She was furious that I hadn't told her about the opportunity, furious that I'd abandoned the family, furious that I was flaunting my wealth while she was struggling to raise 2 kids. I pointed out that she and Marcus lived in a house twice the size of my condo, that she'd just posted photos from a vacation to Hawaii, that her definition of struggling seemed very different from actual hardship. That's when she said something that cut deeper than anything else. "You've changed, Kimberly. You used to be kind and generous. Now you're just selfish and cold. Money ruined you." I sat with that accusation for a long time after we hung up. Had I changed? Absolutely. Was I selfish? Maybe. If prioritizing my own well-being after 32 years of prioritizing everyone else counted as selfish. Was I cold? No. I was just finally warm enough to recognize how cold they'd always been to me. David's reaction was the most predictable, but somehow still disappointing. He called 3 days later with this overly friendly tone, asking how I was doing, saying he'd heard about my success and wanted to reconnect. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about nothing important before he got to the real point. He needed money. A lot of money this time. $20,000 for some business investment opportunity that would change his life. When I said no, he dropped the friendly act immediately. Called me a terrible sister, said I'd forgotten where I came from, accused me of thinking I was better than everyone else now that I had money. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the money, it was about the pattern, the fact that he only contacted me when he needed something. But he wasn't interested in understanding. He was interested in what he'd always been interested in, what I could do for him. When I held firm on my boundary, he hung up on me. I haven't heard from him since. The weeks following my family's discovery of my success were emotionally exhausting in ways even my therapy sessions with Dr. Reynolds struggled to address. They didn't just want acknowledgement of my achievement. They wanted access to my resources without having to acknowledge their past treatment of me. My mother started calling with emergencies that required money. Rachel would send me articles about family helping family, about how siblings should support each other. David sent me a long email detailing every time he'd ever been there for me, conveniently forgetting the hundreds of times I'd been there for him with no reciprocation. They were trying to guilt me back into my old role, and the pressure was intense. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if I was wrong, if I was being too harsh, if family really did mean you had to keep giving no matter how much it hurt. But then I'd remember Rachel criticizing my free childcare, my mother dismissing my achievements, David mocking my worth, and I'd know the truth. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to serve. And I was finally done serving people who saw me as a tool rather than a person. The question was, could I stay strong enough to maintain these boundaries when everyone I'd grown up with was telling me I was wrong? The answer would define everything about who I was becoming and who I'd be for the rest of my life. It's been 18 months since I accepted Alexander Thompson's offer, and I'm sitting here today in my office at NextGen Solutions, looking out at the Silicon Valley skyline, thinking about how far I've come and what it cost to get here. The AI-powered quality assurance platform we built launched 6 months ago, and it's already being used by 50 major companies. My team has grown to 23 people. My salary has increased. The $3 million I was given has been invested wisely and has grown substantially. By every external measure, I've succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. But the internal transformation has been even more significant than the external success. I'm not the same woman who stood in her mother's kitchen washing dishes that weren't hers, accepting criticism for free labor, believing that being invisible was just her lot in life. I'm someone who knows her worth now, who sets boundaries, who chooses herself without drowning in guilt. And if you're watching this and you're where I was, trapped in relationships that drain you, sacrificing yourself for people who don't appreciate it, wondering if you'll ever be seen, I need you to hear this message. Your life can change. You can choose differently. You deserve to be valued. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you are not alone in this journey, and I want to be here to remind you of your worth every single day. What's one boundary you're going to set this week? Tell me in the comments and let's hold each other accountable. My relationship with my family is essentially non-existent now, and I've had to make peace with that reality. My mother and I exchange brief text messages on holidays, nothing more. Rachel and I haven't spoken in over 6 months. David might as well be a stranger. There's grief in that loss, real and persistent grief for the family I wanted them to be, but they never were. But there's also freedom. Freedom from constant demands, from emotional manipulation, from the exhausting work of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I've built a chosen family instead. My team at work who respect and value me. Friends I've made who show up for me the way I show up for them. A community of people who celebrate my success instead of resenting it. And I've learned that blood doesn't make someone family. Behavior does. The people who truly love you want to see you thrive, not just survive. They champion your dreams instead of trying to keep you small for their comfort. The question people always ask me is whether I regret taking Alexander's offer, whether the family estrangement was worth it, whether I'd do it all again knowing what I know now. My answer is always the same. I regret not doing it sooner. I regret the years I wasted trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it. I regret the opportunities I probably missed because I was too busy serving everyone else to invest in myself. I regret the younger version of me who believed that self-sacrifice was the same thing as love. But I don't regret choosing myself. I don't regret betting on my own potential. I don't regret learning to say no. And I don't regret walking away from relationships that only existed to benefit other people. Those choices saved my life in every way a life can be saved. Financially, professionally, emotionally, spiritually. I went from surviving to thriving, and that transformation was worth every difficult conversation, every boundary that caused conflict, every relationship that ended because I refused to stay small. Here's what I want you to understand if you're in a situation like I was. You don't owe people your dreams as payment for their love. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to accept crumbs and call it a feast. The people who are supposed to love you should want you to succeed, should celebrate your victories, should support your growth even when it's inconvenient for them. If they don't, if your success threatens them, if your boundaries anger them, if your happiness makes them uncomfortable, then they're not your people. It's that simple and that devastating. Letting go of toxic family relationships is one of the hardest things anyone can do because we're conditioned to believe that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that you owe your relatives unconditional loyalty. But you know what's thicker than blood? Respect, reciprocity, real love that doesn't come with conditions and manipulation. You deserve that kind of love, and if you're not getting it from your family of origin, you have permission to build a family of choice instead. My story isn't just about a $3 million deal or a successful career, though those things are wonderful and I'm grateful for them every single day. My story is about a woman who was invisible for 32 years finally learning to be seen. It's about breaking free from roles that were assigned without consent. It's about choosing yourself when everyone around you is telling you that's wrong. It's about the courage it takes to disappoint people, to be called selfish, to face accusations and guilt trips and emotional manipulation, and to stand firm anyway because you know what you deserve. If my story resonates with you, if you see pieces of your own life in what I've shared, then I want you to do something for me right now. Look in the mirror and say out loud, I deserve to be valued. I deserve relationships that give as much as they take. I deserve to pursue opportunities without guilt. I deserve to be happy. Say it until you believe it, and then start making choices that align with that belief. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about overcoming family dysfunction, setting boundaries, and building a life you actually want to live, instead of one you're obligated to endure. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video where I'll talk about specific strategies for setting boundaries with manipulative family members. And remember this, your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice or how useful you are to others. Your worth is inherent, and the right people will see it without you having to prove it constantly. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to question whether the way you're living is the way you want to keep living. You're stronger than you think. You deserve more than you've settled for, and your transformation, just like mine, can start today. The only question is, are you ready to choose yourself? I'll see you in the next video.